Star Trek Strange New World Season 2. This will be the full spoiler review. I do have a review on my blog, soundofbettermyhead.com. Pretty much tried to stay away from any spoilers in there. I ended up giving this season a 4 out of 5. Great show. I look forward to it every week. The show's biggest strength is kind of one of its weaknesses. I do like, it's cool to have the serialized storytelling where every week you could have a different, story. Whatever you want to, it could be like almost like a sitcom, it could be like a horror movie, it could be an action. Like every week they could do something different. But I wish there was more of a kind of thing running in the background, like just an overall kind of arc. If you look at season 1, there was like a thing sprinkled throughout the season with the Gorn, where it paid off in the second to last episode. And you do have another Gorn ending this season, but they don't really support it with the any of the breadcrumbs this time. There's a quick mention of the Gorn in the first episode. I think there's one more mention very briefly in another one, and then just at the end it's like all out battle. And it just would have felt like it would have been better. I don't know. There's just kind of more in the background. Like it kept coming up. We knew something was building, or maybe there's something to get their guards down. I just felt like there was just that narrative was lacking to just kind of keep this whole season a little bit more coherent and pushing forward to those big finales. Because another thing the show does well is the character stuff, because the characters do have their arcs and the characters do carry throughout the season, and it does help you get more engaged with the crew and you're invested in their stories. But I think I wish the show itself had a little bit more of a through line. As far as those characters go, I think Pike had probably one of the bigger arcs last season. This season, so it's a very subdued thing about his love life. Never really gets any major peaks. It just kind of carries his character through the season, which is fine. Una had a really strong start. First 2 episodes, especially episode 2, and then she really didn't do anything the rest of the season. Just regular, part of the crowd basically. This is 2 seasons in a row that Ortega's got basically nothing to do. She had a couple moments of shine, but she never really got a episode that was really kind of centered around her. And it made it worse is they made it sound like that was something we were going to get this season. They even teased it up at a Comic-Con a couple years back, like, oh, this is going to be her episode. And she got the shine that episode, but it wasn't her episode. So really don't know much about her character besides that she flies the ship and she's good at it. And she's maybe a little bit of a racist. And Benga had a couple decent moments, but his stuff kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. Everything this season had to do with his time during the Klingon Federation War, and how he's got PTSD, basically, and this. And there was some strong character stuff out of it. But I don't think they ever really mentioned this at all last season. Last season was about his daughter, and then that got resolved, and you never heard him say, yeah, my time during the war sure sucked. It just never really came up. So it felt a little bit forced how it was going on this season. Uhura had some, strong moments. Again, she didn't really get a full-on Uhura episode necessarily, but she came pretty close. Her episode where she could hear those aliens was kind of like her episode. She got some strong moments in the musical episode. Lyanne had some of the strongest stuff. I think her stuff with the alternate Kirk was really good, and I like that did carry throughout the rest of the season, and eventually got resolved around the musical. And the biggest media story stuff went to Spock and Chapel. They really set some stuff up in the first season. There was some decent payoff this season, but just every time I don't know, it was a little inconsistent. It's like, okay, it looks like they hooked up. Now they're just kind of talking. Now they're kind of fighting. Now they're kind of together. It was never really solidified how the relationship was progressing to the point where it was over, but maybe not. And it gets tough because if they're going to stick with canon, there's a certain place that her and Spock need to be when you get to the original series. And I guess this would be a spoiler for the original series if you don't watch it. And when we get to the original series, at some point Chapel met Dr. Corby. They got engaged, and then he disappeared. That's why she stayed with Starfleet. She was hoping to find him again. We know that Spock went back to just being hardcore logical Vulcan, no time for relationships. And we know that Chapel was still like basically in love with Spock throughout the original series, and he just couldn't reciprocate because he wasn't feeling those emotions. And it's like, okay, how do they get to this point where he cuts his emotions completely off and she falls in love with him even though she's engaged and hoping to find her fiance? Like, it's a little complicated. I don't know how to get to it smoothly, but whatever. As far as the more minor characters, that introduced Commander Pelia this season, the new chief engineer. She was fun and quirky, but we don't really get that much of her. Like, we get some early on, like, okay, she's going to be fun. We just actually don't see her a ton. We get a lot of appearances by Lieutenant James T. Kirk. They come really close to bending and breaking canon again. You know, they really go out of their way when he meets Pike to, you know, to tie specifically to a line from the original series about when he first met Pike. But then he keeps showing up. It's like, okay, you met Pike once supposedly, but now you're singing and dancing with him. So where'd that come from? Again, it's not a breaker. It's just always nice when they could tie the canon in better than they do. I mean, I know they want to tell the best story they can, but if you could tell a great story and tie it into, you know, the canon, that's huge thumbs up for me if you can pull that off. We got the cameo by Scotty in the finale, which was fine. He seemed very young, and considering he seems like he's supposed to be older than Kirk and Spock in the original series, and the Scotty here seemed like younger than both of them. Just kind of threw me a bit. The biggest guest appearance would be from the Lower Decks crew. It was great to see Mariner and Boimler in live action. It's really disappointing that there was no way to see any of the other cast from Lower Decks in person or live action. I would love to see the Cerritos, you know, somehow in live action. But I thought those two were fine. It's weird seeing them so toned down because you're used to them a certain way in the animated series. But I do like how their story was able to like affect a lot of the other main characters' storylines. And I thought that was really well done. And they said the season itself was kind of all over the place. There was, you know, some pretty interesting concepts like the musical. I'm not a fan of musicals. The episode itself was fine. I didn't think really any of the songs were too memorable. A lot of the songs I started kind of zoning out on. Like, I know the lyrics are supposed to be more important on this show because these characters are telling you their internal thoughts that they normally wouldn't express. So you're actually getting in the main characters' heads more than you ever would. But I just found myself zoning out. Some of the longer songs, like for example, Leanne's song, I was like, okay, what's she saying? Okay, she's just kind of standing there by the bed, and now I'm just waiting for the next scene. It was a little more fun when they played it up for like the laughs, like Pike and Patel. Like I said, the crossover was fine. There was a couple episodes this season that they felt pretty generic. Like, they felt like you could have taken the general script and rewrote it and put in like any combination of characters from like the major Trek shows. It could have been a Next Generation episode. It could have been an early DS9 or original series or even a Voyager episode or Enterprise. Like, just felt like pretty generic Star Trek. Not that that's a bad thing. It just felt like Stranger Worlds has been better about making things feel a little bit more unique. And I think that's about the gist of it. You know, like I said, there's still some minor gripes and some canon stuff that I feel are inconsistent, and they have the ability right now to make them consistent, and they're just not doing it. But, you know, as the show sticks, the show is coming back again eventually. You know, there's 2 strikes right now, writers and actors. But I think that's about it. Like I said, again, the serialized stuff is fun, but I wish they were able to throw a little bit more of a through line just in general through the season. Maybe they need more episodes. It's kind of hard to do with just 10, though they are able to do it with the character stuff, which really helps you get invested in the characters. So when all this stuff's happening, you care more about them than you might not in some of the other shows. I think I'm going to go through. I got some notes from the different episodes, see if anything here that's, you know, worth mentioning or I forgot about. It seemed a little weird that Spock apparently progressed at some point over the last few months to like barely handling his emotions. Like, I think there was like one scene where he was mad in season 1, and then now all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, his emotions are like just, you know, right at the surface now. It just seemed like a little bit of a jump from last season, but at least, you know, made things interesting. But it's gonna make it that much weirder when he goes back to being, you know, logical Spock again. Overall, the first episode, it was a good, decent concept, but it felt like something that should have been explored over like an episode or 2. It was just kind of building out and getting interesting, and it's like, all right, then we wrapped it all up, and that was it. So that was a little weird. Thought the second episode was pretty solid. Classic Star Trek of taking like a real world issue and giving a sci-fi twist to where everybody that might be on either side of the issue, it's a little bit clearer for everybody. It's not bogged down in like real politics. It just kind of gets to the core of certain issues and kind of shows how like basically how prejudice is bad. Where I think some people could kind of like put blinders on and be like, I don't like this person because of this, and then hopefully open some minds. That Star Trek's always done it. I don't know what the success rate is for converting, non-believers, but they always try. Like I said, the line episode was pretty solid. Goes back in time with the alternate Kirk. I thought they had a nice, interaction between each other. Very interesting point that the Romulan agent said that Khan's whole thing was basically somehow moved decades in the future, which obviously in the Star Trek canon, like the 1990s, genetic Superman conquered the Earth, and obviously we've had the 1990s in real life, and that didn't happen. So basically they're saying, well, because so many people are time traveling and people are always trying to change time, it still happens, but it got pushed farther out. The Rigel 7 episode, which is episode 4, it was really cool that they went back to Rigel 7. It was something that was brought up in the original pilot for Star Trek, so we never really got to see this planet or really knew exactly what went down. But then the first episode just turned into like a fairly generic Star Trek episode. Like, it was a decent sci-fi concept, like this planet makes you lose your memory, like the longer you're there, but just it didn't capitalize on the fact that it was Rigel 7. Like, they could have did just any random planet. And the only real thing that connected it all together was the yeoman that was supposedly dead, and he survived. I think in general, that episode gave me a little bit of a memento feel, like where characters would just suddenly be like, wait, what's going on? And they would just forget what just happened. I think everything got sold a little bit better. Like, the way they did the creepy music and some of the camera angles kind of made you feel like disoriented. Episode 5 was basically a comedy, almost like a sitcom. I got a kick out of it. I liked callback to the Vulcan, nasal suppression that they mentioned way back in Enterprise. Although it's a little weird that Spock used it because he's half human and his mom was human, so he kind of grew up being half human and around humans. So it seems weird that he would need, the dull as olfactory senses. But I think it just worked better for the plot, so that when he became human, it's like, oh, now he smells bacon and he likes it. And just some fun moments. They did a great job of setting up like Spock trying to be logical Spock again, and then him being pure human and his reaction to stuff. And I thought it was hilarious the way he almost got in a fight with Sam Kirk and told him that he was going to break him, and he had to get held back. They did a great job there. Like I said, a little bit too sitcom-y, like borderline too sitcom-y when the in-laws came in, because his mom's like a total bitch, and the dad's like actually pretty cool, but like he's kind of cowers to the mom, or at least as much as a Vulcan can. But some decent comedy in that whole situation. Some great action shots from Pike, just kind of like in the background, and like this awkward faces he was making because of the awkward situation. Interesting type of aliens where they seem to be non-corporeal. They're basically like almost like the ones they talk to are almost like a customer service call center, and it was an interesting take. When they actually went inside this little portal, whatever, it was a decent design, but it just kind of looked like they were just in front of that new stagecraft screen, and it's like a step better than like most green screen stuff. Or like when you see stuff like, yeah, they're on the green screen, they're not there. It's like kind of similar effect here where it looks better, but it's still kind of like, yeah, they're in a stage somewhere. Episode 6 with Uhura and those aliens was very strongly like a lot of previous Star Trek episodes. I mean, I can name quite a few, but just where aliens are dying because the humans or whoever don't understand that they're killing them, and the aliens kind of are fighting back. And it's happened with they're not necessarily aliens, but you had the exocoms, you had the Horta, you had I think there was those alien microbes in the sand in an episode of Next Generation. It just happened so many times, and this also when you get into like this, heard them subliminally almost getting to her. Remind me a little bit when Data was dreaming about stabbing people, and it was actually there was some type of alien creature infecting the crew, and he was just somehow subconsciously detecting it. Just it reminded me of a lot of previous concepts. It wasn't bad, just it was made it almost a little bit more predictable. So it was cool seeing Hemmer back, even though he was either a video or a imaginary character. I thought that stuff with Pelia, number 1, felt a little tacked on, where she didn't like Pelia just because she was sad about Hemmer. Like, it seemed a little weird. It just felt like something, trying to give them something to do. The big crossover episode, one thing I didn't like is it starts off with Lower Decks, and then they end up in the live-action Strange New Worlds. I think that would have killed it if that was the way they did the Lower Decks episode, where you're watching Lower Decks, and all of a sudden these characters, they end up in the live-action world, and they meet the Strange New Worlds characters. I thought that would have been a better flow, but I don't know how else they would have did it here, because you got to introduce these characters to the audience so they kind of know who they are when they pop up, later in the show. It was really cool that they did the animated version of the opening credits, although I actually missed it the first time. I had to go back and watch it later. They said the character stuff was great. It was heartbreaking for Chapel to find out that her influence on Spock is just going to be unlimited. Loved the callback to episode 2 with Una and finding out how she becomes basically a poster child to promote Starfleet. I like Pike kind of realizing that, yeah, his story's kind of written, but he should spend time now with the people that care about him when, it's still possible. Episode 8 was the big Omega episode. Really dark. It was the darkest one this season. You could see that they sandwiched this one between the comedy episode with the crossover and the musical. It really felt like their best attempt at a Deep Space Nine episode, like really getting into like the horrors of war and PTSD and kind of like a gray moral ending. It was a little bit uncomfortable to watch. I know that was part of the point, but I said just because this Omega stuff felt a little bit forced, I just don't think it sold as well. If this is something that was established more with this character from season 1, I think it would have been a little bit better. But it did kind of subvert my expectations, because I was assuming at the end they'd find common ground with this Klingon ambassador and they learn to work together for peace, and it ends up being the exact opposite, basically. Like I said, the musical episode was decent. There was some good character stuff in there. Really liked that they brought up that Kirk has got an off and on relationship right now with Carol Marcus, and that she's pregnant, because it does work out roughly in the timeline, because David's an adult by, the Star Trek 3, Star Trek 2, which is about 30 years from now or so, a little bit less. Did crack up with the Klingon boy band. I know for some reason a lot of people had issue with it, but I think that was the point, because Klingons love a good song, but the songs and dances they were being forced to do, you can see why they thought it was so dishonorable they wanted to blow this thing up. And I also didn't realize that the actor playing the lead Klingon was the same actor that played Hemmer. I didn't know it at least until afterwards, so I thought that was a pretty good reuse of the actor. Season finale, it was a strong episode. This seemed like more of a normal Star Trek. Like, you get away from all the the fluff and the experimental stuff in Strange New Worlds, and this is kind of what you would expect, especially with a modern Trek. Like, you got to fight a pretty horrific enemy. This episode kind of turns a little bit almost like a horror movie. Ties back into the one from season 1 really well. I'm glad somebody told me ahead of time it was going to be a cliffhanger, because otherwise I would have been like, that's it? Because I've said that they've had episodes where it looked like there was no way they were going to wrap it up that quickly, and then they do. So at least this time I was like, okay, they can't wrap this up, and I knew that they weren't going to. They got Batel set up to be killed off because she's got Gorn eggs in her. I'm hoping that every season it's not like, let's end it by killing with someone, because they killed Hemmer last time, and now Batel's life's on the line. I don't want that to be a thing, but also we know that I don't know what kind of relationship she would have with Pike going in the future. Like, I don't know how that pans out, where he goes off to live happily ever after on Talos 4 with this other chick. Like I said, it was cool seeing Scotty, seeing all the ways he thinks outside of the box. That was nice. But as far as the actual cliffhanger itself goes, it was fine. Kind of leads you to have to follow up immediately afterwards, going into season 3, and it kind of sucks because there is going to be such a time jump in real life before they can even start working on the show. So by the time we get it, it could be years. So it would have been a good opportunity for years to kind of pass on the show, or at least a longer, stretch of time. Instead of oh, this is 5 minutes later, even though everyone aged, a couple years. But on the other end, they only got so many years to work with before it catches up with the original series, and then they run out of time. But I said, other than that, that's about it. I probably could go on forever because Star Trek's one of my favorite things, especially when they do it right. So I could be nerd out about it for like a long time. But I'm just trying to just cover Star Trek: Strange New World Season 2, and I dug it. It had a couple issues, but overall I thought it worked. And that's about it. Like I said, I got the non-spoiler version of this up. I have other reviews. I got comic strips. Those are all at soundedbettermyhead.com. So thanks for watching.